I buried my husband on a Tuesday in October. Yesterday I watched him buy a gallon of 2% milk at the Kroger on Pine Avenue. I had gone in for the simplest things: bread, eggs, a bag of those clementines that come in the mesh sack because my granddaughter loves them and she was supposed to come stay with me that weekend. I was wearing the old navy cardigan with the loose button I kept meaning to fix, and I remember thinking, as I pushed the cart past the deli counter, that I had finally gone a whole morning without crying. It felt like progress. 7 months of progress in one morning. Then I heard him clear his throat. It was a small sound, a nothing sound, the kind a person makes 1,000 times in a marriage and never notices. But after 43 years, you don't hear those sounds with your ears. You hear them with your bones. I stopped in the middle of the dairy aisle with one hand on the cart handle and one hand reaching for nothing at all, and I felt the floor tilt the way it had tilted the morning the police chaplain knocked on my door. I turned around. He was standing maybe 15 feet away in a gray jacket I did not recognize, holding the milk in one hand and a carton of orange juice in the other, frowning down at the price stickers the way he had frowned at price stickers this 1981. The same broad back, slightly stooped now. The same thin silver hair, combed to the side with water. The same liver spot on the back of his right hand, the one shaped like Florida, the one I used to tease him about. The wedding band was gone. That was the only difference. I made a sound. I don't know what kind. Something between a word and a wound. The carton of clementines slipped from my hand and the mesh bag burst on the linoleum and small orange suns rolled in every direction. And a young woman in a Kroger apron came running and asked if I was all right, ma'am. Are you all right? And I could not answer her because my husband, the man whose name I had picked out for a marble headstone in a cemetery off Highway 70, was 12 feet away from me deciding between Tropicana and Simply Orange. Honey, I said. He looked up. For one heartbeat, I saw it. The flicker. The way a person's eyes catch on someone they know. It was there. I would swear to God on a stack of Bibles it was there. And then it was gone, replaced by something polite and careful and entirely false. I'm sorry, ma'am, he said. Were you talking to me? His voice. His voice. The voice that read aloud from the newspaper every Sunday morning. The voice that sang off-key in the shower. The voice that said, I do in front of a Baptist preacher in Tulsa, Oklahoma in the spring of 1982 when I was 22 years old and believed the world was a kind place. It's me, I said. My throat was closing. It's me, honey. It's Joanne. He took a step back. A small step, but I saw it, and it broke something in me that I did not know was still whole. Ma'am, I think you have me confused with somebody else. My name is Calvin. Calvin Rourke. I'm sorry for your trouble. He gave me a thin, apologetic smile. The same smile he used to give the waitress when she got our order wrong, and he turned and walked toward the checkout, and I stood there in a puddle of clementines with my mouth open like a fish on a dock. He was not confused. He recognized me. I have been married to him since Ronald Reagan was in his first term, and I know the difference between a stranger and a liar. A bag boy helped me to a bench by the customer service desk and brought me a small paper cup of water. I drank it. My hands were not shaking. That should have told me something right then. The old Joanne would have been shaking. The old Joanne would have been crying. But something inside me had already gone very still, the way the sky goes still before a tornado. I sat there and I watched my dead husband pay with a debit card. I watched him decline a receipt. I watched him pick up his 2 plastic bags and walk out the automatic doors into the parking lot, and I waited maybe 10 seconds, and then I got up and I followed him. I am 66 years old. I have arthritis in my left knee and a hip that clicks when I climb stairs. But I walked out of that grocery store like a woman 30 years younger, and I got into my Buick, and when his silver Camry pulled out onto Pine Avenue, I pulled out 3 cars behind him, and I do not know where I learned how to do that. Maybe from television. Maybe from somewhere older than that. Maybe every wife who has ever been lied to is born with that knowledge sleeping under her ribs. He drove for 22 minutes. I know because I kept looking at the clock on the dashboard, the way you look at a clock during labor pains, just to prove time is still moving. He drove out past the high school and past the new Walmart and onto a road I had driven maybe twice in my life, a road that wound through pine trees and past a Methodist church with a hand-painted sign that read, "Jesus is the answer." He turned into a development of small ranch houses with brick fronts and chain-link fences. He pulled into the driveway of a yellow one with a magnolia tree in the yard. I parked across the street, 3 houses down, in front of a vacant lot. I turned off the engine. I sat in the car with my hands folded in my lap like a woman waiting for a doctor. He got out of the Camry. He carried his groceries up the front walk. The screen door opened before he reached it, and a woman stepped out onto the porch. She was maybe 50. Not young, not a bombshell. Just a woman in jeans and a t-shirt with her hair pulled back, the kind of woman you would see at any Cracker Barrel in America on a Sunday afternoon. She kissed him on the mouth. Not a peck. A real kiss. The kind of kiss that knows where every freckle is. She took one of the grocery bags from his hand, and they walked into the house together, and the screen door slapped shut behind them. And I sat in my Buick across the street and learned what it feels like when 43 years of your life are being lived in a yellow house by people who are not you. A boy came around the side of the house then, maybe 9 years old. Brown hair, gangly, holding a basketball under one arm. He shouted something toward the backyard, and a dog barked in answer. And then the boy went into the house through the side door, and I understood, the way you understand a thing in a dream, a half second before it happens, that my husband had a son. I drove home. I do not remember the drive. I do remember pulling into my own driveway, the driveway of the house he and I had bought in 1988, and sitting there for a long time looking at the porch swing he built me for our 30th anniversary. There was a hairline crack in the back slat I had been meaning to ask him to fix. He had been meaning to fix it for 2 years before he died. Before he supposedly died. I went inside. I sat at the kitchen table. I did not turn on a light. The sun went down and the kitchen went gray and then dark, and I sat there in the dark, and at some point around 9 o'clock at night I picked up my phone and called my son. Now I have to tell you about my son so you understand what came next. My son is 41 years old. He's a finance officer at a hospital in Charlotte. He is the kind of man who irons his own shirts and brings his own coffee in a thermos and never raises his voice. After his father died, my son drove down from Charlotte every other weekend to mow my lawn and check the smoke detectors and ask me, in that careful voice he gets, whether I was eating. He was a good son. I want you to remember that because I believed it for 41 years, and I need somebody else to have believed it too before I tell you the rest. He answered on the second ring. Mama? You all right? I need you to come over. Tonight? Mama, it's 3 hours. Tonight. He was quiet for a long moment. Did something happen? I saw your daddy at the Kroger. The silence that followed was a different shape than the silence before it. I had spent 41 years listening to that boy. I knew the difference between his confused silence and his guilty silence. This was the second one. Mama, he said, slow and careful, you've been having a hard time. Grief plays tricks. Remember what Dr. Phillips said about. I followed him home, sweetheart. He lives in a yellow house off Old Mill Road. He's with a woman. They have a boy. The boy looks about 9. The silence got longer. Stay there, Mama. Don't go anywhere. Don't call anyone else. I'm getting in the car right now. You knew. Mama. Drive safe. I hung up. He arrived at 12:45 in the morning. He let himself in with his key. I was still sitting at the kitchen table, and now I had turned on the small lamp over the stove, and I had a glass of water in front of me that I had not touched. He came in and stood in the doorway of the kitchen, and I had never seen my son's face look like that before. He looked like a child who has broken something expensive. Mama, sit down, baby. He sat. He put his hands flat on the table. How long have you known? I said. Mama, it's not how long. He looked at his hands. He looked at the salt shaker. He looked at the photograph on the refrigerator of his daughter at the spelling bee. He looked everywhere except at my face. 3 years, he said. 3 years, he said. I had been planning his father's funeral while my son had known for 3 years. I had paid $11,000 to a funeral home in Greenville for a casket I picked because it had brass handles his father would have liked. I had stood in a black dress at a gravesite in October and let men I had known since 1982 hug me and tell me I was strong. I had sorted his clothes into bags for the Goodwill. I had spent 7 months teaching myself to sleep on the far side of the bed because the near side was empty and the empty side was unbearable, and my son had known for 3 years. "Tell me," I said. My voice was so calm it scared me, all of it, right now, and he did. He told me his father had come to him 3 years before with a problem. A woman, a son he had not known about, conceived during a work trip to Mobile 12 years earlier. The woman had finally tracked him down. She had cancer. She was dying. There was a boy, 8 years old, who had no one. My husband of 40 years at that point, had told my son he could not bring himself to tell me. It would destroy me, he said. It would destroy everything we had built. So instead, he had begun to build something else. Slowly, quietly. He had a private bank account I had never known about. He moved money into it for 2 years, small amounts, the kind a wife who trusts her husband would never notice in the joint account. He took out a second mortgage I did not know existed by forging my signature on documents he brought home in a folder marked TAX stuff that he knew I would never open. He used the money to buy a small house on the other side of the county in a name that was not his, Calvin Rourke. A grandfather, my son said. A grandfather on his mother's side who died in 1979 and whose social security number had never been properly closed out. My son knew a man at the hospital who knew a man who knew how to clean a dead man's documents. The woman in Mobile did not die. That was the first thing that went wrong. She got better. The boy needed a father. My husband, my late husband, my live husband, had decided he wanted to be that father. He had decided he wanted to start over, but he could not just leave me. There was the church. There were the grandchildren. There was the house, which was in both our names, and the retirement accounts, and the life he would lose along with the lie. So he and my son, my only son, the boy I'd carried for 36 hours in a hospital in Tulsa and named after my own father, had sat down at a kitchen table somewhere I had never been and planned how to kill him. A man at the VA hospital in Charlotte, a homeless veteran with no family, terminal cancer, 6 months to live. My son worked in finance. He knew people who knew people. The veteran was paid $40,000 in cash, which he sent to a sister he had not seen in 30 years. He agreed to die under another man's name. The accident on Highway 70 was real. A single-car wreck, late at night, fire, body too damaged for open casket. The dental records were swapped at the morgue by someone my son refused to name. The funeral director was a man my husband had known since high school. The casket stayed closed because the family requested it. I requested it. I had been told it was kinder. My son said that word in my kitchen at 1 a.m, and I almost laughed. "You let me bury a stranger," I said. "Mama, you watched me pick out a casket for a man you knew was sitting in a yellow house 26 miles from here, eating breakfast. He said it would be easier on you. He said you'd grieve and heal and have the grandchildren and the house and the savings, and you took his side." My son started to cry. He was 41 years old, and he put his face in his hands and cried at my kitchen table like he had not cried since the day his hamster died in 1989. I did not move. I did not reach for him. I sat with my hands folded on the table the way I had sat in the car across from the yellow house, and I watched my son weep, and I felt nothing at all except a small, clean wind blowing through the middle of my chest, where 43 years of marriage and 41 years of motherhood had been. "Go home," I said. "Mama, please, let me. Go home, baby. I need to think." He went. I sat at the table until the sun came up. I did not sleep. I made a pot of coffee at 6 and drank it black and watched the cardinal that had been visiting my bird feeder all summer come and eat his breakfast on the porch railing as if nothing had changed. For 3 days I did nothing had changed. For 3 days I did nothing. I did not answer the phone. My son called 11 times the first day and 7 the second and 3 the third. He left messages. I did not listen to them. I ate toast. I watered the tomatoes on the back porch. I went to the bank on Wednesday morning and I sat down with a teller named Tamika, who had known me for 9 years, and I asked her, very quietly, whether there had been any unusual activity on our joint accounts in the last 3 years. There had been. There had been a great deal of it, and I had never looked. I had let him handle the money. I had been a woman who let her husband handle the money. I wrote that down in a small notebook I had bought at the dollar store, and I underlined it twice. On Thursday morning, I called a lawyer. Not our lawyer. Not the man who had drawn up our wills in 1995, who played golf with my husband and ate Easter dinner at my table. A different one. I found her in the phone book, an old habit, the kind of habit a 66-year-old woman still has. Her name was on the second page under attorneys. She had a small office in a strip mall next to a nail salon. She was about my age. She listened to me for 90 minutes without interrupting, and when I finished, she folded her hands on her desk and said, "Mrs. Pettigrew, I am going to ask you a question, and I want you to think before you answer. Do you want this to be quiet, or do you want this to be right?" "Right," I said. She nodded. She made phone calls. She knew a private investigator, a woman, a former sheriff's deputy who had retired down to our county to be near her grandbabies. She knew a forensic accountant who specialized in marital fraud. She knew an assistant district attorney who had prosecuted exactly 2 cases like this in her career and was looking for a third. The investigator confirmed everything in 9 days. The house on Old Mill Road, the bank account in the name of Calvin Rourke, the second mortgage with the forged signature, the boy's birth certificate, which named my husband as the father under his real name and predated our youngest grandchild by 3 years, the woman, whose name was Brenda, who worked part-time at a daycare, and who, according to the investigator's careful work, did not appear to know that her common-law husband Calvin had another wife and a son, and 3 grandchildren, and a house and a life, 1 county over. That last part hurt more than I expected. I had spent a week hating a woman I had never met. I had imagined her as a villain, the kind of woman who breaks up homes for sport. But she was just another woman who had been lied to, and her boy was just a boy, and her boy had not asked to be born into any of this. I asked the investigator to find me an address for Brenda's sister. I called the sister. I introduced myself. I said, "I am about to ruin your sister's life, and I would like you to be the one who tells her, because I do not want to be cruel, and I do not want her to hear it from a police officer." The sister was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Ma'am, can you give me 3 days?" I gave her 3 days. On the 7th of November, my lawyer filed the complaint. The charges were forgery, identity fraud, mortgage fraud, financial exploitation of a spouse, and conspiracy. My son was named as a co-conspirator. I did not weep when I signed the papers. I signed each page with the same Bic pen I had used to sign my husband's death certificate 7 months earlier, and I thought that was a kind of poetry, although I did not say so out loud. The sheriff's deputies went to the yellow house on a Tuesday morning. The investigator told me later that he came out without a fuss. He was wearing the gray jacket. He asked the deputies if he could put on his shoes. He kissed Brenda on the forehead and told her he was sorry. They handcuffed him on the front porch with the magnolia tree dropping its last brown leaves around his feet. My son was arrested at his desk in Charlotte the same afternoon. I did not go to the arraignment. My lawyer went. She told me afterward that he had looked at her across the courtroom and asked, very quietly, whether his mother had sent a message. She told him no. I had not. There was a great deal of mess after that. The forensic accountant worked for 4 months and recovered most of what had been moved. The second mortgage was voided. The house on Old Mill Road, which had been bought with money stolen from our joint accounts, was seized and sold, and the proceeds were returned to me. Brenda and the boy moved in with her sister in Mobile. I sent her a check for $10,000 and a letter that said none of this was your fault, and the boy did nothing wrong. She wrote me back a week later. The letter was 3 sentences long. It said, "Thank you. I am so sorry. I did not know. I keep it in the drawer of my nightstand." He pled guilty before trial. His lawyer told him a jury would not be kind to a man who faked his death and let his wife bury a stranger. He was sentenced to 7 years. He served 4 months. He died in the infirmary at the state prison in Bennettsville of a stroke on a Thursday afternoon in April, while watching the Braves game on the common room television. The warden called me himself. He was a kind man. He asked what I wanted done. I asked what I cremation. I told him to scatter the ashes wherever the state scattered the ashes of men whose families did not claim them. He said, "Ma'am, are you sure?" And I said, "I am very sure." And I hung up the phone and I went out to the porch and I watered the tomatoes. My son got 5 years. He is 2 years in. I have not visited him. His wife brings the grandchildren to see me on Sundays, and we do not talk about him, and the children are still young enough that they do not ask the hard questions yet. Someday, they will. I have already decided what I will tell them. I will tell them that their grandfather and their father made choices, and that the choices had consequences, and that I loved them both, and love them still, and that love is not a hiding place for cowardice. I will tell them their grandmother is not afraid of the truth. I think that is a good thing to teach a child. I sold the house in March. I bought a small one closer to my daughter, who lives outside Asheville. And I planted tomatoes again, and I joined a book club, and I learned how to use a smartphone properly. And I took a watercolor class at the senior center, where a woman named Doris told me on the first day that her husband had run off with the church secretary in 1994, and it had been the best thing that ever happened to her. And I laughed for the first time in a year. Sometimes I drive past the cemetery off Highway 70. There is a marble headstone there with my husband's name on it, and underneath it lies a man named Earl Thaddeus Briggs, who was 62 years old when he died, and who had no one in the world but a sister in Texas who got $40,000 in the mail with no note. I tracked her down last spring. I wrote her a letter. I told her what her brother had done and what he had been used for, and I told her that he had been a man who deserved his own name on his own grave. I paid for a new headstone. It is a small one. It says, Errol T. Brigs, beloved brother, 1961 to 2024. I go out there every couple of months and I put flowers on it. He is the only honest man in this whole story, in a way. He sold his death, but he never lied about it. People ask me sometimes, friends from church, women in the watercolor class, how I am still standing. They mean it kindly. They expect me to say something about Jesus, or about strength, or about the love of family. I do not say those things. I say what I have learned, which is this. A woman who has been lied to for 43 years is not weak. She is the strongest person in the room, because every day for 43 years, she was loving the truth as she understood it, and the truth was a fiction someone else had written for her, and she loved it anyway, and that kind of love does not disappear when the lie is exposed. It just stops being given away for free. I am 67 years old now. I sleep through the night. I have my own checking account and my own car and my own opinions about the news, which I never used to share at the dinner table because my husband did not like to argue. I argue now. I argue with my book club. I argue with my daughter, who thinks I am too political. I argue with the woman at the post office who tries to sell me stamps I do not want. I argue because I have something to say and because nobody on this earth is ever going to make me silent again. Forgiveness is a word people throw around like it is free. It is not free. I have not forgiven my husband, and I will not, and I do not believe God will hold that against me, because I think God understands the difference between a sinner and a thief. I have not forgiven my son either, although I will see him when he comes home, and I will feed him, and I will love him the way a mother loves a child she has buried alive, which is to say, completely and from a great distance. The yellow house is empty now. I drove past it once in the fall. The magnolia tree was bare. A For Our Soul sign was crooked in the front yard. I sat in my Buick across the street for a long time, the way I had sat that first afternoon, and I thought about the woman I had been 7 months before, picking out clementines in a Kroger, believing that the worst thing in her life had already happened. It had not. The worst thing had not yet happened, but the best thing had not yet happened either, and the best thing turned out to be me. The best thing was finding out who I was when I had nothing left to lose. I drove home. I made myself supper. I ate it on the back porch, where the tomatoes were just starting to come in, and I watched the sun go down behind the pines, and I was, for the first time in a long time, alone in the way. A person is alone who has chosen it. That, I think, is the only ending worth having. I have thought about that morning in the Kroger more times than I can count, and what I keep coming back to is this. Every choice my husband made, every choice my son made, every dollar moved, and every signature forged was a small thing at the time. None of them woke up one morning and decided to destroy me. They decided to skip one conversation. They decided to sign one paper. They decided to keep one secret for one more week. And then another week and another, until 43 years of a life were sitting inside a lie too big for any of them to carry. And the lie did what lies always do. It got hungry. It needed more. That is the part I want the young women in my family to understand. Causes are quiet. Consequences are loud. The man who let me bury a stranger started becoming that man the first time he had a phone call from me in 1996, and I will never know what that phone call was about, but I know now that it was the seed. Small dishonesties grow into large ones the way a crack in a foundation grows into a collapsed house. Nobody notices the crack until the wall comes down. I also want them to understand something about silence. I was silent for 43 years, not because I was a coward, but because I had been raised to believe that a good wife keeps the peace, and a good mother does not see what she does not want to see. I let my husband handle the money because that was what wives did. I did not ask the hard questions because I did not want the hard answers. And I want to be honest with you. Some of what happened to me happened because I let it. That is not the same as deserving it. A woman does not deserve to be lied to because she trusted. But trust without attention is just a soft place for a liar to land, and I have learned the difference. The strength I found after the Kroger was not new. It had been inside me the whole time, underneath the casseroles and the laundry and the silence. What changed was that I finally used it. I walked into a lawyer's office in a strip mall, and I told the truth out loud, and the truth, it turns out, is a kind of muscle. It gets stronger every time you use it. If you are a woman reading this, and there is something in your house you have decided not to look at it. Open the folder marked TAX stuff. Ask the question you have been afraid to ask. You are not too old. You are not too tired. You are not too fire. I was 66 years old in a puddle of clementines, and I built a new life out of the wreckage of an old one. And I did it without God, and without a man, and without anyone's permission. I did it because I decided to. That is the only thing any of us ever really has. The decision. Everything else is just what happens next.